This is video one of a idea I had. No idea how this will go. The following will be an excerpt from a book that I read recently, within the past year or so. It is an extract of the Christian's Pattern, or a treatise on the Imitation of Christ, written in Latin by Thomas à Kempis by John Wesley. Print date is 1820. Just a little tiny book for anyone who likes to collect books when there is an or, typically. So that first part, an extract of the Christian's Pattern, and then it says or. It simply means that the book is known by two different titles. To break this down, in about 1000-ish AD, Thomas à Kempis wrote a book that's very well known called Of the Imitation of Christ, or Of Imitation of Christ, depending on who translated it. In 1500s-ish, or 1600s? Either or. I'm not exactly going off a script here. John Wesley writes a translation of Thomas à Kempis's book, which is originally in Latin. So John Wesley writes it or rewrites it in English. And you end up with essentially this book where Wesley has taken what he thinks is good from Kempis's work and has reformed it, again, also in English, not in Latin, into almost a Proverbs type of book. And I'll read a couple sections from this, just so you get a taste of what's in here. I'm sure if you looked for it, you could find a PDF of the entire thing online. These particular books, if you're lucky enough to find one, you'd probably find for about $50 or less, depending on if the seller knows what they have. Personally, I think these are worth a lot more, but you know, prices are not dependent on my opinion. But yes, John Wesley, of course, if you're not aware, is the founder of the Methodist denomination. Very fascinating history. He started preaching straight from Scripture, and his church got mad and kicked him out as pastor, which is sad. But, you know, now we have an entire denomination. And that, honestly, that's kind of how a lot of denominations, if you look into church history, go. It's denominations or churches or mission movements have a tendency after about 80 to 150 years to break down to infighting, which causes essentially a church split in which you have one that sticks with things that don't matter and the other ones that want to get back to the roots of the gospel. We had a recent one happen. I don't remember which denomination. I think it was like Episcopalian or something, where there's a lot of infighting regarding some minor theology, and the church ended up splitting. And so now there's two different branches of this one denomination. Again, I don't know if it's Episcopalian. That's the one that sounds right in my head. But you have one that's like, hey, we want to get back to what the gospel of Jesus Christ is, rather than all of these minor theologies that don't actually matter. And the other ones are arguing about whether or not women can be in ministry or something like, I forget what it is. It ultimately spread the gospel. The rest of it doesn't matter. Anyway, so I'm going to read a little bit of this. Now, please, I'm a bit of a bibliophile. I don't know. I love books. When you have a book that's over 100 years old, please do not open it at 180 degrees. Please open it like 45 to 60 degrees max. Yes, I understand the whole purpose of a book is to read it, but for the sake of the integrity of the spine, please do not open it 180 degrees. All right, sure. I'll shut up now. So this is from chapter 5 on verse 14. And I'll translate a little bit because this is Old English. Truth, not eloquence, is to be sought for in Holy Scripture. All Scripture is to be read by the same Spirit wherewith it was written. We ought to read plain and devout books as willingly as high and profound ones. Let not the authority of the writer, whether he be of great or small learning, but the love of pure truth, draw you to read. Do not search on who spoke a thing, but mark what was spoken. Men pass away, but the truth of the Lord remains forever. God speaks to us sundry ways, without respect of persons. Our own curiosity often hinders us in reading the Scriptures when we will examine and discuss that which we should rather pass over without much more thought. If you desire to profit, read humbly, simply, and faithfully. Inquire willingly and hear with silence the words of holy men. Dislike not the parables of the elders, for they are not spoken without cause. End of chapter 5. Very, very short little books in here. Again, very much like Proverbs, in which you have lines here and there on different topics, and it'll bounce back and forth. I'm going to read 2 more here. So this is chapter 6, and then I'll read chapter 7. Of avoiding vain hopes and pride. He is vain that puts his trust in man or creatures. Be not ashamed to serve others for the love of Jesus Christ, nor to be esteemed poor in this world. Presume not upon thyself, but rather your hope in God. Do what lies in your power, and God will assist your good will. Trust not in your knowledge, nor in any living creature, but rather in the grace of God, who helps the humble and humbles the proud. Glory not in wealth, nor in friends, but in God. For he gives all things, and desires to give you himself above all. Value yourself not for the strength or beauty of your body, which is spoiled and disfigured with a little bit of sickness. Do not pride yourself in your natural gifts or your intelligence, lest thereby you displease God. Do not esteem yourself better than others, lest in the sight of God you be accounted worse than they are. Do not be proud of your good works, for the judgment of God is far different from the judgment of men. If there be any good in you, believe that there is much more in others. It does not hurt you if you think yourself worse than all men, but it hurts you much to prefer yourself before any one singular man. The humble enjoy continued peace, but in the heart of the proud is envy and frequent indignation. Chapter 7. That too much familiarity is to be shunned. Lay not your heart open to every one, but treat of your affairs with the wise and such as fear God. Do not converse much with young people and strangers. Do not flatter the rich, neither do you appear willingly before great persons. Keep company with the humble and simple, with the devout and virtuous, and confer with them of those things that may edify. Do not be familiar with any woman, but in general commend all good women to God. Desire to be familiar with God alone and his angels, and fly the knowledge of men. We must have charity towards all, but familiarity with all is not expedient. Really quick, when it says fly the knowledge of men, it just means run away. But yeah, so 3 very short chapters. I think it took me a month or 2 to really go through all of this. Again, very short book. There's a total of, if I can get to the back of the book, 208 pages, at least for this edition. It's not a hard read. It's just a lot to process, which is why it took me so long. But yeah, these have been excerpts from the Christian's Pattern, and kind of like this.